Royal Society of the Arts, just very quickly, is an organization that's been around a mighty long time. There's right now, I think, 31,000 fellows, and it's a bunch of really forward-thinking people looking at social good, doing programming that fosters in hopefully a better world. We're really looking at the future. Technology is going to augment how we work, how we play, all of those types of things. And so we look in this group to do three things. One is come together to talk about the developments that are happening, the technologies that we're seeing, the ways that we imagine or dream of all of this coming together to make a different world. Two is to create relationships that enable a sandbox for us to play in, building out some of these technologies. We've got a bunch of people that have their fingers in the field already, literally and figuratively, so that we have the tools to be able to try things and take theories and see if we can make them proven as opposed to just theories. And then the third thing is, based on our discussion, discourse, relationships, research, et cetera, hopefully in the long term, we're a go-to group that is unbiased and unrelated to any governments or any specific governments or companies, et cetera, so that we can have a say, I guess, or help people understand what the reality is here, as opposed to we're seeing a lot of fear mongering or self-serving pieces of legislation that are not fully thought out. So that's very quick about the ASN. So we do have these monthly gatherings. Zoe and I, who are the co-leads of this network, we come up with the topics. We are open to everybody saying, I would love for us to discuss this. I would love to take this on, all of that. So please do not hesitate if there's an interest. You know, again, today's topic, people are coming together to work, play, and share information, increasingly on very different terms. We see opportunity and new forms of sharing taking place. So there's peer-to-peer decentralized networks, individuals taking responsibility for their own data security, different, more eco-friendly ways of using power. The question of, is what emerging, is it even quote unquote good? The internet had its underlying protocols of TCP IP that were designed to decentralize sharing and get information to its destination, come what may, whether nuclear war, dictators overthrown, whatever. And it was supposed to be the ultimate Pony Express, again, going back a few hundred years, like the RSA. Now the very success of the internet is threatening its existence. Countries are looking inward, political unions are falling apart, and long-time established powers are faltering. We're seeing this a lot with China closing off the World Wide Web, other countries sort of faking that, but we'll get more into that conversation. So this is truly a time of opportunity to make technology in a form that respects individual rights to privacy, and one that is built with the welfare of the planet and redistribution of wealth included in the equation. With this discussion, we wanted to dive in and see where it goes. And Zoe, I'll start with you. I'll just push it to you. When we talk about owning our own data, understanding where to place our trust, those are huge pieces, because trust has taken on a whole new meaning. You know, who do we trust? How do we trust? And then idea of even owning our own data with how much data we've given away. You know, what are your thoughts? Like, how is this evolving? Where are we going?
So yeah, not a small question at all. The understanding of what data we actually have, how important that is in terms of either giving it or not giving it. And not giving data is just not possible anymore, because you create a shape of yourself in the world through your mobile phone's metadata. Picking it up and putting it down is data. Moving from one website to another is data. The trust element is to a degree being dealt with in the UK with GDPR, but not on a very low level basis in terms of a transactional agreement between you as a customer and them, or you as a business. This strikes me as a very small but very important beginning to the conversation of where you put your data and who you trust. I combine that with having moved to the States and there being absolutely no GDPR, but equally I don't understand the brands that I see. So I don't understand if Coles is good and Sprouts is bad. I just have to find out. So brand value to me has also gone. And I honestly don't know who to trust. So my reaction to that is to trust no one. to find a chip and a way of implanting my data in my wrist, under my skin, and I don't know how else I come out of that world, but in some way, the only person I can trust now is me, because I have no context, I have very few rights, and yet I know the world is racing away from me and that data is being collected on a massive scale. So I don't know who to trust. I'd like some advice on who other people are trusting or what their thoughts are.
Zoe, just trust me.
No.
It's interesting when you talk about like implanting a chip in your wrist, you're still sort of off grid. Like, what is the interface? Like, if that is if, you know, right now I use a fob to get to my floor in the elevator in my new apartment building. Do you see that we're going to be having a chip that we choose who we're going to swipe that in front of and who we're not going to swipe? And unless we've swiped, we're not going to hear anything from that entity?
Yeah.
That's it.
I can make a small contribution. As far as GDPR in the UK is concerned, what we had before it was a Data Protection Act. And the reality was that the Data Protection Czar, whatever it was from government, had no staff to do anything. Data was not respected, and hardly anybody was ever prosecuted. The GDPR regulations are a tiny bit tighter, not much. It's fairly early days. I don't trust anybody. I think big companies will just ignore it and abuse the data anyway. The government is perhaps putting a little bit more behind it now, so it will take time to know whether it gains weight or not. And the only people I trust with my data are ones that are so small that no one's going to buy it from them anyway. So the rest of them, I don't trust them. But you can't do much, can you? You can't, if you want to do business with them, you can't not let them have your data. That's just the way the world is.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're carrying around loads of cash, it's hard to, like, how do you transact and how do you not have data shared? It's interesting with Kaleido, with a lot of what we're exploring is as technology gets stronger and stronger, our vision of the future is where blockchain will be that much more robust in the holding of our data, so that, you know, we know that blockchain can do micro contracts on its own, so that we could say we only want to share the data, this data, with Facebook for a certain amount of time, as opposed to just letting Facebook run rampant, or Google, or what have you. We've got a long way to go. We're going in micro steps. With that being said, Maurice, to your point about all this data that's out there, you know, and how little people would care about. The crazy thing is there's so much more data out there people are actually processing. And there's so much more information about us and so many more services that could be provided if the data was actually utilized. I don't even want to say properly, utilized at all. And so I think it's a really interesting concept. How do we even move around in society without utilizing our data?
If anyone's heard of Steve Gibson in grc.com, he's developed a technology called Squirrel. And it's a new way to do passwords for websites. And I think it's done. He's been working on it for a few years. Basically, it's a protocol level technology. So nowadays, when you go to a website and you give them a password, they hash it and they store it in a database with some good hashing algorithms. And then when you go to the website, you type in your password. Well, his technology is a protocol level technology that basically there's no passwords exchanged back and forth. The website just knows you. So you don't have to pass a password. There's lots of other technologies out there, but I think one of the most critical is one called Solid by Tim Berners-Lee. And of course, he's the guy that started the whole mess with the internet and HTML. And originally it was designed as a way to share information, right? There was no security, there was no nothing. It was like, you can create a website and you can link to someone else's website. And it was all about me sharing whatever data I wanted to share openly and publicly. And then we started security stuff on top of that, which it was never designed for. He's working on a new technology called Solid, which is basically where you have your personal data and you decide who gets it and for how long they get it. I'm starting to pull back all of my data. Now what I find myself doing is pulling back everything. So I've totally disconnected from Google. I don't use Gmail anymore. I've been downloading all my Google data and storing it locally on my own machines, and setting up alternative calendaring systems and email systems. So I don't depend on someone like Google to run my business. Of course, now I have to depend on Google to get business because everyone goes to Google to search me. So I still haven't gotten away from that. One day I would love to not have to rely on Google search for business as well, because, you know, Google could get broken up just like AT&T got broken up.
I mean, it's a matter of gaming the system, right? I mean, Berners-Lee, when he put out that thing, maybe didn't take a moment, or we all didn't take a moment to think, well, what are the possibilities? How can this be leveraged for bad instead of good? You know,
but if we go back further, it's actually TCP/IP, not HTTP, that was the beginning of this. So it was supposed to be nuclear proof, and the underlying, the message getting through on a very strong communications network is what has allowed everything else to sit on top and to become what it has. So I just wanted to go back a little bit to that, and then how we actually dealt with all of that.
Yeah, there's actually one technology that I'll just throw out there for everyone to take a look at. It's called Briar, BRIAR, like throw me in the briar patch. And it's basically a messaging technology like Signal, but this is a distributed technology which people like in Hong Kong could be using right now, because you don't even need the internet to be able to message people. So if you're in a situation like they're having in Hong Kong, where you have a mass of people, basically it creates a mesh network from phone to phone to phone to phone, just based on Bluetooth technology and Wi-Fi. So the internet could go down and you could still communicate with people. And even if you're offline, you can still get messages from people that are online when you do connect. So like I would have to be in your presence, and I would have to scan your phone, and you have to scan my phone, and now we're securely connected and no one can middleman us.
So if we go back again to, I mean, we may as well bring up Tor and the dark web, and
it uses Tor as well.
Yeah, all of that side of things. So if we were looking at the way we communicate and how we've stepped aside both from TCP/IP to create these other places, these more secure areas, this is what's caused regimes to actually want to turn everything off. Where are we now? The data will and won't get through depending on the country you live in. But if you can't, then if it's gone, if China's closed the door, Russia's already testing, it has been for a number of years, having a Russia-only internet. This is the backwards of what was supposed to happen. So how have we got to this point?
Well, I think you're just going to see more of that. You're going to see, you know, like you're going to see more centralized ghettos like Facebook closing down and saying, okay, if you want to come play in our world, then you come play in our world. And what basically Facebook did was they said, oh, you know, we're this great place, and everybody started going there. Now they're trying to lock it down and say, well, if you want to do business with our people, then you need to play by our rules.
Okay, so then it comes down to what, you know, another thing that we wanted to talk about, which is the value of what are we looking to give up, to gain, to distort?
Exactly.
And, you know, Wayne, with what you were talking about in terms of that secure environment, the connection one-to-one with WhatsApp, I didn't need to be close to you. I just need to know your information. And then that supposedly was no middleman. And then fast forward, they're now owned by Facebook.
Exactly.
So
and there is a middleman.
Right. And so it's like, to me, my challenge, you know, I remember with Google Maps when it first really came out to combat MapQuest, and there were a bunch of companies that I was working with like, oh yeah, we could use the Google Maps, like it's free. And it's like, it's free. And now even with that Google storage, you know, now with Google, they're saying that the full storage that they were saying, oh, it's free, they're going to charge for. I know with my personal stuff, my junk mail is my like tabs at Yahoo. And it started off as free and you pay $20 for it to be with no ads. I just got something, we're now going up to $35. And then it's a question of what is the value? And I don't know that I want to deal with ads. I don't know that I want to be sharing information. So maybe it's worth 35.
There is a comment on that basically there's a great book which discusses the post-Google world, and the idea that basically if your product is free, you don't have a product. So wherever anything is free, we all know that is not the intention, nor is it sustainable. The whole Google idea of massive clouds with centralized data is an old model.
Yeah.
This is something that is causing immense issues. If you actually put everything in one place, you're telling hackers where it is. You are creating an unstable business. So if we then go back to distributed data, I just distribute everything over anyone who's willing to help me and run my business in all the tiny little spaces. And I move away from that big centralized, even Amazon Web Services, they run the same way. This is so outdated in terms of the way that you actually could and need to manage data. If you make use of all of the tiny gaps on the disk on a server, then I can fill it up. I can use that space and everything can be more efficient. But whilst everything is centralized, you are creating something that is utterly unsustainable. If your product is also free, then that's not sustainable. So all I can see is Google coming crashing down, and within the next, say, 2 years, 3 years, it may be able to hang on because it's so rich. But surely the future is in decentralized, distributed, what are called dApps, being aware of sustainability. This is where the future is, surely.
Yeah.
I think that it comes back again to the whole concern of iterative. And I understand why we do things, because people already have these devices. And so to get people to sign on or adopt or whatever, if we do iterative instead of like, hey, you got to get a whole new box, go buy it, it's a hard sell. The other challenge that I have when you talk about something, a business that is free is not a real business, tell that to the VCs, because the VCs will rate a value, and it comes back to value. They'll rate it based on how many users they have. Whether they're paying or whether they're free, yes, it's all based on we imagine that we'll be able to convert X to paying whenever that comes, or we'll be able to advertise X to whomever is getting it for free. We're really in a wonky position.
Yeah. I'm looking at the model beyond that. So you're right to talk about the steps in between.
Yeah.
But the model where I'm actually being honest about what it is that I'm actually selling as well.
Yeah.
Because clearly what you're explaining there is it's advertising, it's being there, that's the value. I'm amazed at that some shops that I go into, there is no concern for the product necessarily. It's just that I have to be in that shop. But me being there is more valuable to that company than what they're actually selling. So the customer service is lousy. Everything about it is lousy. They have a business behind the business. And this is the cynical area where I see that things need to change.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about how when Google first started, they were all about just providing this cool service and search and all this. And then one of the engineers in a meeting said, hey, why don't we put an ad up here? We could sell ad space. And that became like their whole business model, right? It's like, let's give everyone a free product and sell ad space. I was listening to Twit and Leo Laporte. Their whole business is based on advertisers, but they do it differently. A lot of the companies out there that are based solely on selling advertising really need to reevaluate their value, because I don't want to see an ad. Have you ever bought anything off Facebook?
I actually rely on the ads that appear to go back to where I was, which is probably a terrible thing to say, because
you're saying you retarget it instead of doing a bookmark. You'll just I'll go look at a retargeted ad and
Yeah,
Click
and
on
then
it.
I remember where I was. Yeah, and I start my journey from there.
Interesting.
But there's a lot of people like me that turn off all advertising completely. Like, I don't have ads show up because either I don't use a website that shows me ads, or I have all kinds of track blocking set up to where I don't see the ads.
I think it's a case of going over them, glossing over them. I don't think there's too many of you, no offense. You've worked hard to get that vanilla feel for where you want to be. And I think that's part of what the discussion is about, is creating those new places that you can be, where you're only seeing the things that you want to see and you're willing to pay for that.
Or the other side, that you're actually providing that. So to that point of, there are many companies that were hit hard when ad blocking really became big. Years ago, right?
Yeah.
When they realized, my goodness, I'm losing so much traffic that I was getting before. I'm losing so much incremental revenue because of that. And so they had to reimagine. And so you've seen companies that reimagined and are succeeding, and some that don't. And, you know, you brought up about Google. What about Amazon, where they were using so much server space? Why not just build these farms? And you know what? We'll actually sublease out through AWS. That's their moneymaker. Individual items are nothing. And then, like, it's the data that they collect from those individual items.
Yeah.
You know.
So back to my point about the value of the product is not there. So that I don't care about any of that. What I want is from behind, I want that data. So what I'm actually offering you is just something that you have to tolerate. At some point, that will implode, surely.
Yeah.
Mitchell, any thoughts on this? You always come up with really smart stuff, and you've been silent all these years.
No, I've been listening. It's you know, as an individual, there's only a certain amount of influence that you have, and so it seems we're in this equilibrium where it's working out. It's not completely working out for anybody, but it's kind of working out for the big companies, and it's really not working out for individuals, especially individuals who are aware of what's happening. But as individuals, we don't really have any power to change it. So the question is, can we, in my mind, is there a way for us to change this whole paradigm so that we as individuals have power, or that there's some organization that represents us that has power in order to change and force the larger companies to give us back our data?
And it is there.
Right. I don't know. That's what was occurring to me. And I was just trying to figure out, like, is there anything like that? But then Jonathan asked me a question. So it's like, well, okay, well, this is what I'm thinking, but I hadn't really fully thought it out yet.
That's going to take organizations like the RSA, I think, to help us out, and is a great place actually to begin those conversations. Just from a personal experience, being on the other side of copyright. So when I moved countries, my digital self didn't move with me. My digital UK self is very different to my digital US self. My laptop back in the day said I can change where I live 4 times and then that's it, it's over. My DVDs I couldn't watch them. Things disappeared and reappeared. So I know it's not the ultimate experience of the individual taking on the system, but it is a very small example of where I felt utterly outside of some things that were then not mine anymore, that I'd paid good money for, that by getting on a plane and driving, I didn't fly, by going 5,000 miles was suddenly not mine, because the digital rights management hadn't been agreed for the West Coast of America. So you're absolutely right. The big companies are sorting these things out, but they don't understand regionalization either. They have no interest in the individual. While you need to be there to buy the product, they have no concern for me losing my rights. What happens to my Apple Music?
So it's interesting to bring that up, because that's what we talk to media companies about all over the world. Even with Netflix, let's say as I'm traveling, I'm able to download stuff for watching later. As soon as I connect via Wi-Fi, whether it's in UK, somewhere in Asia, whatever, all of a sudden I can't watch those things anymore. Okay, and that's on a hard drive. That's not even server based. That's where the DRM.
So that's how companies, particularly with DRM, have tied us down, and we just let them do it.
Well, I just made a trade-off. I got the new iPhone, and it has the opportunity of scanning your face. And like I was thinking, I really don't want Apple to have my face. On the other hand, I then started using the apps that I use all the time, and every one of them requires a password every time I go in, or I can scan my face once and never have to worry about it again. And it's like, I don't want to spend, this 15 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day typing in my password every time I go from one app to another app. So Apple now has my face. That's how they get me. But I know that, if somebody takes a picture of me, Apple can recognize that it's me because they have my face.
And that's why I'm so promoting it to everyone I talk to, GNU and Linux as free software. Because, Richard Stallman had it right back in the 80s. In order to be completely free with no handcuffs, we need to be using free software. And I made the decision in my life, in my business, that I'm going to run as much free software as possible. My second choice would be open source. And my last choice is obviously proprietary software when I have to run it. So I'm all Linux. And as soon as I can get a Linux phone, I'm getting a Linux phone.
I'm just interested, do you ever give back? How do you give back?
You mean to the Linux community, to the GNU community?
How you transact in that way.
Yeah, so right now I'm giving back by promoting and talking about free software. I'm starting to learn more about how else I can contribute, like to software projects like GIMP, which is the alternative to Photoshop, Kdenlive, which is the alternative to Adobe Premiere. There's lots of alternative softwares out there, and they're free, but they actually make money too as a business. So that kind of ties back in with what was mentioned earlier. Google provides a free email service, but they're taking your data and they're selling it.
Yeah. So it's a far superior model. I completely agree.
It can work.
But the idea is that you give back and you continue to contribute. So
if you want to see it succeed.
Unlike Microsoft, unlike some of the big guys, you buy and no one contributes. So the developers all develop their stuff and it's tied up with patents and everything else. Whereas as GNU basically, if you come up with a new idea, you have to redistribute that to the community, which is a way healthier way of developing software. But at some point, this industry is also undergoing a commercial realization. Now, the private sector is picking up on this and offering kind of the private bit and the open source bit. They've realized they can't fight that anymore. But I would still want to understand thinking, and the philosophy behind it is understood by those people who use it, and that they do contribute, because it is just such a far superior way of creating software.
Exactly.
Some interesting concepts, because you talk about the giving back. It's not, if we're talking about Linux, it's not about delivering code, which many people would just assume, if you're going to be sharing, I've got to be a coder. I've got to be able to add to that open source. And Wayne, what you talked about in terms of being a voice, I have this idea, and I'm sure other people have thought of it, and maybe somebody's working on it. And I know my business partner, Dean Donaldson, and I have talked about it. If there was an overarching loyalty points type program where you get rewarded for doing the things that are offline, so mentoring, volunteering, all those types of things where it is, I say offline, but you still have to have something that tabulates these points. But again, deriving value, as we as society have grown into the currency value as opposed to barter, which used to be, right? I've got 6 sheep that I'll trade you for 50 eggs and a whatever. What, Zoe? You don't want the sheep?
No, I don't want the sheep.
Okay. It's interesting. Are we going to move back to, do we move back to the future? And that's what this future could be. We now have many more sensors and ways of tracking. And, I'm sorry. I think that we're too far gone to say my face being on Apple takes away privacy, because I already lost that privacy. Because my photos, I know, are in a database somewhere. Somebody has taken a picture of me and uploaded it, that it could be triangulated. You know?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so
And you're not going to be able to escape that, but you can choose to disconnect today.
at what cost?
It's the cost of convenience. So like, for instance, now I manage all my own passwords on my computer using a free software, whereas I used to use LastPass, which is okay, but it's not free software, right? So now when I want to type in a password on my phone, I have to actually type it in. That's a convenience cost.
Yeah, I understand.
I get that, but what about the connectivity issue or element? And as we see things evolve,
Yeah.
what else might we be giving up if we take ourselves out of these networks?
Okay, like for instance, on Gmail, if I go in and I start typing a Gmail, it'll say, hey, do you want to reply with this automated reply?
Right.
Well, sure, that saves me 20 seconds or 30 seconds. I can just hit yes, reply. But now it's a robot message. But if I actually took the time to type the message myself, it may be a totally different message with more heart or whatever.
Right.
Right.
I get that from the convenience thing and the autofill and all that. And I get equally pissed off when I'm using something on my Android device and it like I'll do, let's say I do, I type or swipe in whatever, the word whatever, and it gives me Stolskinsi, or like,
Yeah.
when would I ever say that? Like, why, if you're so smart, why are you telling me that? I get that whole convenience thing. I want to talk about connectivity.
Okay. What do you mean by connectivity?
How are we as a society connected? How are we introduced to new concepts? How are we removed?
How do we learn?
How are we removed from our echo chamber?
Okay, we can still do exactly the same stuff that you want to call connectivity, but there needs to be a free option and an option that allows me to share what I want to share. So if I want to be anonymous and keep my data private, then I can share that. But like with Facebook, like today, I think you probably have to supply a photo ID from your government to even create an account. So that's not free and that's not an option, but they've tricked everyone by feeding them all these little goodies first. It's like the crack dealer, here, take a little bit for free. And then later on, you have to come back to us.
And,
So
in Mr. Zuckerberg's defense, even with, like, I thought it was bizarre that a congressperson talked about his haircut. And, I don't know if you guys saw that.
I didn't hear it.
In his defense, he was young and naive when he started Facebook. He had thought about all these things. And then it's all these other voices that come in and say, oh, do advertising, do all that type of stuff. I think that it is so hard or challenging for us as individuals to be thinking big picture. How do we take ourselves out of ourselves of the betterment of society? And when we talk about, every time you throw out the word free, Wayne, get back to Facebook, to Google, because those were free.
No, Libra.
Okay, no, Libra, whatever it is, it's free, but it comes back to, in the description, trust. Trust is huge. How are we going to get back the trust? And you talk to certain people that are not of our demographic that don't give a crap about trust. They just do, like, whether it's TikTok, whether it's any of bright, shiny object, no qualms about it. It then comes down to the makers, the creators, the forebears of the future, that have the power, whether it's as a group, as in a corporation, or as Mitchell says, as an individual. What can we do as individuals to make sure that we're looking out for each other? And, there's an id going on around the world right now where it's certainly, I look at this as the 30 years or the 3-decade cycle. We're back in the 80s in me. And unfortunately, we're too far there. So how do we get to the we together, not run all the way home, but the we together? That's a big challenge. And it's, how do we get there? What do we do?
So I think there are glimmers of that, definitely, in the emergence of the collapse of some governments, some businesses. We use the word disruption now quite freely. We are in the midst of well, it's silly to say a changing world because it's clearly constantly changing. But are we not already seeing the end?
The end as in like explosion, Big Bang, or the end?
No, in terms of standard.
Like Fortnite end?
Yeah, right. I'm going to put a meteorite right into the middle of this. No, the end of purely, well, the big companies as we see them now, the Hudson Bay Company lived, prospered, died. Are we not in the end phase of these big centralized companies who have absolutely outstayed their welcome? People are turning off in the way that you are, Wayne, finding new ways in the world to communicate with each other that don't allow the government to track us, that don't allow other people in. We're looking at distributed ways of connecting, of storing our information, of decentralizing what we do ourselves. So are we not, that's what I mean by the end, are we not just moving into the next phase?
Well, okay, and here's a completely different question, is if we could come up with, or if we had a more equitable distribution of income, would anybody really care about any of these other things?
So it goes back to the old enemy then, really, of advantage. I guess it does.
It could, yeah.
Okay, so then look, we have the disparity of income. We know that. There are some people, though, that do a lot with much less than others, and they don't care. They don't, like, they're quite happy, and that's great. The wealthier you get, it seems like the more issues you have that you never thought you would have.
Well, you could be happy on almost any income until it's put into your face how much better people are doing with more.
Yeah, when you become aware of more, which is an issue for some countries where more is being crammed down the faces of people with less. This in itself will create social disruption.
We've got a few minutes left, and going along with that disruption and going along with the individual, Zoe, you said something that got me thinking immediately about the music industry. So the music industry was just rolling along. You know, you had the traditional record labels, executives that were just rolling in the dough because of how they had built up the system. And then all of a sudden, you see streaming come along, and they were really late to the game. You see entertainment, movies and television that I was a part of, that I was kicking and screaming, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And I had people say, yeah, no, we see this as being 5 years down the road. Entire divisions are gone. If we look at just the music industry and how streaming changed things, whether the powers that be understood it or not, the powers that be then are now grasping at whatever they can, if it's even still there. And the whole music industry has changed. The way music is making money has changed. We're going to have to go through that same type of disruption and for all of these other things. There are going to be those big companies that are just moving at such a pace that they can't innovate. They can't do these things. But I guess we just have to leave on that note because we are at our hour and we know that we can go on forever. Zoe, do you want to tease next month's session?
Yeah, so next month we're moving on to virtual reality and understand some of the big movers and shakers in that. Join us for that. It's already out on Meetup. It's out on the RSA's website as well. So we'd love it if you could join us for that.
So thanks, everybody. As always, a great conversation. Hopefully we find ways to actually put things into practice coming, and feel free. I believe we'll be posting this on the site as a podcast. So even if you're listening to this after the fact and you have ideas, ways that you want to get involved with, charges that you want to take on, please let us know. And thanks everybody for participating, listening, just being a part of the ASN. Cheers.